I've been making videos about Dark Souls for almost 2 years now, and I'm a little surprised that I haven't made a Dark Souls 2 video in my original style yet. What better way to start off than with the most iconic weapon in the game, the fire longsword you find in the first level that can easily carry you through a good chunk of the game. This is the classic new player weapon choice, like the Drake Sword, but in this game it's actually pretty good for the whole game instead of passable at best with an annoying upgrade material. I don't think it's exactly the best choice for a full playthrough, but I suppose that'll become evident in time. There's not much to starting this run. I just chose the warrior class for stats and a bonfire aesthetic for an important purpose later. I tried to make a character that I like at least a little, but I've always been bad at character creation. Anyway, after the stuff that you do at the start of every Dark Souls 2 playthrough, getting the Estus Shard and other random junk around Majula, I headed into the forest to grab our main weapon. It's fairly easy to just run past most things to get to the Cardinal Tower bonfire, but I did take out the ogre in the water for the chance to get a soul item. As long as you sprint past the enemies laying on the ground, you should have time to open the fog wall. You do get iframes for a bit of the animation, but ideally it shouldn't matter either way. The ladder can be a little inconsistent to get up like this, but it didn't end up mattering this time, luckily. From there, you can just jump down right in front of the entrance to the tower and drop down a few levels to get to the bottom. I'm making sure to take out at least most of the enemies here so I can safely open the chest containing the longsword, which is admittedly a little annoying with nothing but a broken straight sword. Either way, the salamander is really bad at hitting you while you're opening the door for some reason, so actually getting into the little room is no problem, and immediately I can see why this is such a popular weapon choice. The infusion giving a flat AR increase worth about double the base damage of the weapon, on top of split damage not being obliterated here like it is in Dark Souls 1, makes this thing a force to be reckoned with this early on. Real quick, before getting too far, I want to do the same idea in Dark Souls 1, but I'm kinda torn on how I want to do it, and I would like opinions. In the base game, I don't think a fire-reinforced longsword would be that worth using. Instead, I'm considering using a rebalance mod I made called Goddess of the Sun Edition, which effectively reworks all weapon balancing and brings it more in line with Dark Souls 2. I think that would be a more interesting run, on top of being a good way to show off a cool mod that I made, but I want to know what you think. Now that I have the sword, I can make my way around and get some upgrade materials and such. First of all is the crystal lizard above the room with the bonfire behind the breakable door. I grabbed a firebomb from Malincha after buying Leningrast's key, and used it to go the wrong way through the shortcut before nearly blowing myself up with the explosive barrels and running down to Kale to grab the mana key. Heading back to Majula nets me the Seldora set from an unfortunate accident involving Malin, as well as another Titanite shard from his former shop. The manor contains 3 more Titanite shards, as well as a guaranteed effigy from the skeleton and another Estus shard. With all the Titanite shards I've been gathering, I have plenty to get the longsword up to an easy +3. Now, while this will easily shred everything up to and including the Lost Sinner, I have a bit more setup to do before we fight pretty much anything. If you've ever played Dark Souls 2, you almost definitely know about the Dragon Rider cheese, where you don't pull any of the levers through the level, then walk into the fog, wait for 7 steps, roll past him to the right, and watch him fall to his death. That gives us access to a real-life religious person. I mean, a scammer and a cheat. I make sure to get the key from her before heading back to Malincha and using the souls from the Dragon Rider to get a branch of yore. Talking to her after spending about 10,000 souls will have her give you the Silver Serpent Ring +1, and I'm actually ready to fight a boss. I'd rather do the other setup first, but I'm already here, I need souls, and the Ring of Blades is a nice bonus, on top of several more encounters with the Pursuer. It's really easy to just strafe most of his attacks, and the damage from the Fire Longsword is plenty to send him down back into the depths where he came from. From there, I have enough souls to get the Cat Ring and level my health, along with my ADP and Faith a bit. Fire damage scales both off of Faith and Intelligence, but not as much as any other damage type, so weapon buffs are going to be pretty important pretty soon. Anyway, getting past the room with the 5 bloated hollows ends up not being an issue whatsoever despite only having a +3, and we can reach the Shaded Woods without incident. Getting through the foggy part of the Shaded Woods is no issue as long as you hit the trees, and the Chloranthy Ring +1 will remain in one of my ring slots for the entire rest of the game. This jump can take us to a Cyan Knight, guarding some bone dust to upgrade our Estus and a soul, of which there are a few more to pick up through the level. There's one here next to the exit of the Basilisk Cave, a chunk near the bonfire in this wooden chest, one behind these barrels in this room, another chunk and a boltstone from this crystal lizard, and one more soul from up where Creighton will show up later. That gets us plenty of souls to level up a few more times, getting my faith to 18 and my intelligence up a bit. Then that gives us more than enough health to comfortably make it down to the bottom of the Majula well. I missed the crystal lizard here, but it would normally give us a couple large titanite shards, and I can grab them later. There's another of the 5 bone dust here, and getting down into the gutter itself isn't too bad with the cat ring. It's hard to explain the path I used to get through the gutter, but just know I crossed a few bridges, climb a ladder, and make this jump here to get to the bonfire. From there, it's easy to get into the Black Gulch. Apparently there's 20 life gems on the way down too, which is actually really good to know for the future. I had no idea there were so many here despite playing the game so many times. I never actually ended up buying life gems in this playthrough. Now, my first idea was to farm for both large shards and chunks from the Darksuckers. Oops. Anyway, even if I did do that, I'd want to at least get the Watch Dragon Parma for the drop chance increase. But first, the bonfire is easy to... Forlorn. I always get Forlorn in the most inconvenient places. Well, I got rid of her fairly easily at least, and getting to the bonfire was actually easy from there. Victor is a lot easier than Forlorn, so I didn't have any more trouble down here. Before heading back into Hade's tower, I want to get the large titanite shards from the chest in the forest behind the door you need to knock on. That's enough, combined with the crystal lizard I missed earlier, to get to a +5. We can also pretty easily run through the wharf to get a couple more large shards from the crystal lizard behind this breakable wall, along with a fragrant branch and some souls. The last large shards I need can be gotten from the giant basilisk below the path after the first cop's bonfire. I've never had much issue with this basilisk, but I expect that to change someday. That's an easy +6, and since I'm here, I might as well start Creighton's quest for later. Another bone dust and Estus shard can be found here as well. Creighton's quest just sees us grabbing this key next to Rowena and talking to him in this room that it unlocks. With that, I actually want to go to the Tower of Flame. The R2s on the Longsword actually stagger the Hade Knights in a single hit, making them a non-issue, and the old Knights aren't really ever much of a problem. The damage is more than enough to handle them. The Drake is probably at least resistant to fire, but when it just sits there and stomps a couple times, that's not really an issue. I might as well fight the old Dragon Slayer now too. Ornstein is never really hard, and I don't think is exactly resistant to fire, so the damage does not leave anything to be desired. I'd argue that this iteration of Ornstein is about as hard as Super Ornstein if he actually had good hitboxes, so it's pretty easy. Now I have enough to get my intelligence to 24, which is actually enough to use Whisper of Despair, one of the most important spells for this playthrough. Hitting an enemy with it will decrease their physical defense for a decent amount of time, really upping our damage. I did try to farm chunks for a bit, but honestly it's so much easier to just fight Najka after talking to Creighton so we can grab some chunks from Seldora. I did grab the slab from the forest, but that ended up not really mattering. Najka isn't so bad, especially if you're just a little bit patient. Her tracking magic can be annoying, but otherwise I actually like this fight quite a bit. It's not hard or super memorable or whatever, but it's fun. The peasants in the first bit of Seldora are annoying, especially the ones with the pickaxes, but a little patience goes a long way, and we can move on to our next boss fight. Proveling Magus in Congregation is a cool idea, but honestly, I think if the Deacons of the Deep and the Magus swapped games, they would both be a lot better. Just take out the casters first, then the rest of the Congregation, and the Magus himself isn't that much of a threat. I nearly forgot to kill Pate, but I did go back and do that now to get the ring for Creighton, getting me the Den key and Creighton's mask for fun. I made sure to grab the chunks on the way down and in the spike pit, as well as the engraved gauntlets. I completely forgot they even had a requirement, but I wasn't planning on wearing them for another good chunk of the game anyway, just for a bit more soul gain from the Seldora set. There's another ascetic next to Walmart brand Oswald, so the starting gift wasn't necessary, but I still have an idea for that one. With a +10 in hand, Whisper of Despair is easy to grab by placing the lockstone in the contraption. To actually use it though, I need to go back down to the gulch. Oh wait, I already got the forgotten key. I did that with a +6? I'm actually genuinely impressed with my past self. Actually, admittedly, I did cheese it a bit by quitting out after killing only the first of the 2 giants, but I did successfully kill the second regardless. The Forgotten Key lets me grab the staff in the Majula Well, as well as the Talon Key for the DLC later. The Witch Tree branch is the fastest casting staff in the game, and the Bellvine is the same for Chimes. The staff will be a lot more useful for a while though, for Whisper of Despair and Dark Weapon, which we can just buy from the guy in the chair next to the first cop's bonfire. Luckily, increasing our dark damage also increases our fire damage. With that, actually having some damage and most of a build put together, we can head back to the wharf and fight the Flexile Sentry. With Dark Weapon and Whisper of Despair, it doesn't exactly stand a chance, but that was kind of the point. I made sure to grab the Pyromancy Flame for something pretty important coming up, and learned the Pursuer doesn't actually spawn if you come from this direction. Well, he can, but you can't get the Antiquated Key from this direction, so I grabbed the Estus shard and learned another brand new piece of information to me. The Warden thing kicks down the explosive barrel only if you come from the cell bonfire. He doesn't kick it if you come from the workshop bonfire. I will come from the other direction later for the Fragrant Bench, but for now I want to fight one of my favorite bosses in the series, the Ruin Sentinels. Dark Weapon at a plus 10 is very much overkill for them, especially when most of their attacks can easily be strafed, and Whisper of Despair makes it even more of a joke, letting me take out all 3 on the starting platform quite easily. I like this boss a lot because it's both one of the best gank bosses in the series, since one of them will throw their shield if you're fighting more than one at a time, and it demonstrates that there are multiple ways to fight bosses in this game, which is a pretty heavy point that permeates nearly every single fight. Anyway, the Pursuer gets me a few more souls, I realize strength and dexterity are worthless for damage, and level up faith a bit more. Back in the forest, the Fire Longsword alone would be overkill for the last giant, but Dark Weapon and Whisper of Despair make the fight a lot funnier. Maybe more sad, actually. That lets me go past the Pursuer arena, get the branch from this side, and fight another Pursuer for a few more souls. The Sinner's Rise isn't too far from the Servant's Quarters bonfire. The Flexile Sentry always appearing in water does mean it's always resistant to fire, but killing it isn't too bad with a simple cast of Dark Weapon, and I make sure to grab the Blossom Kite Shield for a small stamina restoration buff. I lit the braziers on the sides of the center arena because this is where I wanted to use my aesthetic, since she drops the Old Witch's Soul in New Game Plus, which we can transpose into Flame Weapon, but apparently they go out when you use an aesthetic. Either way, the Sinner is a lot harder in New Game Plus, so I'm gonna go kill the Rotten for a few more souls real quick. Only one fight, I'm not planning on using an aesthetic for the Rotten. Yet. He's not too bad as long as you're a little patient. Greed did end up getting me hit, and he is resistant to dark, so I wasn't dealing a ton of damage, but I was doing enough that the fight wasn't really that long. Actually, they're not resistant to fire despite the giant pools of fire in his arena that he's completely immune to. That kinda surprised me. With those souls, I got my vigor to a comfortable 20 and headed down to the center again. Apparently they put a new enemy under the water that blocks your way and proceeds to explode, which is both frustrating and hilarious. I appreciate this as much as it frustrated me. Anyway, knowing that's there makes it not too bad to get past. 2 red Phantom Warden thingies show up in front of the braziers in New Game Plus, but they're not too difficult to take out, and we can start the real Sinner fight. Her actual moveset isn't that different, if at all, but about halfway through the fight, 2 Pyromancers will join the fray. They don't have that much health, but when you have 3 enemies on you all at once, 2 of them being fast Pyromancers and one of them being a boss, it can be a little difficult. The easiest strategy I found was to rush down the Pyromancers as soon as they spawn. It actually worked out perfectly on my first try, as long as I watched my back for the Sinner. But when I was trying to recover, she ended up killing me with an attack I'd never seen before, where she jumps over you before doing a follow-up swing. A second try got me through the fight just fine though, and that wasn't nearly as bad as I was expecting for using a fire weapon against the Sinner. Her normal moveset isn't that bad, even if the stabs can roll catch you if you don't have a decent chunk of ADP. That gives us a good chunk more souls, and the Old Witch's Soul, which I make sure to transpose. I didn't learn this for a good while, but Flame Weapon is actually kind of useless. It does scale off of your fire damage, but it doesn't scale at all otherwise. It's approximately equivalent to Great Magic Weapon in terms of effectiveness, which is nice when you're clearing levels, but for bosses, Dark Weapon is equivalent to Crystal Magic Weapon. Dark Weapon also has 4 casts, like Flame Weapon, making it also very useful for clearing levels. So once I realized Flame Weapon isn't that good, I kinda just didn't use it as much. It is good early game, especially if you don't rush the requirements for Dark Weapon, but I did, so I wanted it for Freya since she's weak to fire. Unfortunately, the spiders in the fight are awful, so I ended up using a torch and not using Flame Weapon. The Longsword being infused with fire does let me capitalize on that weakness regardless, so I do deal plenty of damage. The easiest way to deal with Freya is to always hold onto the torch and swap heads every time she does an attack, just going back and forth. This takes Freya down fairly quickly with a fire weapon plus 10, and we can move on to our final of the 4 paths. I did make sure to grab the Estus shards from the hidden path to Hade and things betwixt real quick, since I don't think the Fire Longsword will be particularly effective in the fire area. I also want to go grab Flynn's Ring for the free 50 AR increase. I wasn't sure how Flynn's Ring worked with split damage when I did this run, but it does actually split the 50 AR between the damage types you're dealing based on the total percentage of damage that damage type uses. A bow lets you easily hit this switch to cross this gap, run down into the temple, then you can hit this switch from a distance to open the door before sprinting through. Then you just drop into the hole on the stairs before going this way, dropping into the bugs, and running up to the ring. The skeleton lords are our first bump in the road on the way to the Iron Keep. I tend to take out the rightmost one first, which spawns a bunch of normal skeletons, then I take them out before fighting the other two lords. I know some people just take out all three at once, but I find this a tad easier. Not that it's hard either way, but I've had a frustrating encounter or two, so I'd rather make this as smooth as possible. Hey, another instance of being able to fight a boss in multiple ways. It's almost like that's a theme to the bosses in this game. Sprinting through Harvest Valley isn't really an issue as long as you take care to not get poisoned, and Covetous Demon is technically a boss. We'll ignore the fact that I got hit by it due to pure unadulterated greed. We'll also ignore the fact that I lost 90,000 souls by trying to run past enemies in the game that I always tell people to not do that in. A bit more care gets me to the next bonfire without issue. I make sure to remember to light the windmill on fire, and we can get the hidden bonfire right above Mytha. With the poison drained, Mytha isn't too bad. Her lunges have caught me off guard in the past, and her tail whip is good at punishing greed, but luckily none of that happened this time, and I made it through the fight fairly easily. Iron Keep itself was intimidating, but honestly a lot easier than I expected. The knights only took 3 hits apiece, and though I did die a few times on my way to the Smelter Demon, I was eventually able to make it through fairly easily by just making this jump and carefully taking out the rest of the enemies along the way. As long as you use the walls and corners to your advantage to block the archers, it's not too bad of a run. The Smelter Demon was also surprisingly susceptible to my damage, despite the whole fire thing. I assume it was mostly Dark Weapon doing the heavy lifting, but it's not technically immune to fire, which I'm sure helped. The pursuer that spawns in the room after you take out the smelter drops an upgraded ring of blades, so there's no reason to not grab that and equip it. The rest of the keep is fairly simple, just a few turtles and a lot of knights that can mostly be dipped into the lava or taken on one by one. The effigy of Eggley Bonfire is easily missable, but makes the whole level much easier, so I made sure to grab that, turned off the fire around the level, and faced the old Iron King. The damage was not good, but it was a lot better than I expected. I pretty easily got a hit or so away from winning before attempting and dramatically failing to dodge the fire breath, getting sent down into the lava. Once I got back, carefully dodging his arm slams and getting lucky with him not using the fire breath made the fight a veritable non-issue. That's 4 of 4, but I can't forget the last lord before moving on, the Rotten. It's weird that you need to burn an ascetic to fight this boss, right? Anyway, they go down without issue and we can move on. The castle isn't too bad to get into as long as you're careful to kill soldiers in front of the golems, especially since the Mastodon Knights won't attack us once we get in front of the castle. Our last bone test is just before the King's Gate bonfire, getting us a maxed out Estus Flask. The last door on the left next to the King's Gate bonfire lets us fall into a cave to get the final Dark Divers location. As much as I want to do this now for my favorite armor set, I don't really trust myself to get through all of the chasms of the abyss with this damage. For now, the first door on the right lets us actually progress. Getting the Elium Lice key, and after a quick jump down to the spawnfire, our next boss is the Dragon Riders. They're not exactly hard, they don't have much health, but they do deal a bit of damage, so lack of care can easily get you killed here. A bit of caution makes them easy enough though, especially since the archer has approximately 0 defense, going down in only 3 hits. I was using Flame Weapon here since I didn't know how not good it was yet, but I don't think Dark Weapon would have changed much. After luring one of the mannequins back to the golem that brings down the elevator for us, I want to get the flame butterflies from the room with pyromancers on top of the Estus Flask shard there. Usually what ends up happening is sprinting straight to the first sorceress who makes me explode immediately, but I actually managed to hold it in this time. I completely forgot I wrote that. Oh my god. The longest elevator... God damn it. The longest elevator in the game gets us the key for our next boss fight, the Looking Glass Knight. He's actually pretty resistant to fire because of the rain, but Dark Weapon bypasses that little hump quite easily. I've had issues with hitting his shield a lot in fights, and that did almost happen here, but using the thrusting attack on the R2 of the Longsword mitigated that almost entirely. I'm pretty sure R2s are significantly worse for DPS, but the more varied moveset is really useful in certain situations like this. Regardless of the damage of the Fire Longsword in particular, the Longsword itself is a very solid weapon choice. The Shrine of Amana is one of the most hated levels in Dark Souls 2, and honestly, I've never really understood why. I haven't played it in vanilla in a long time, but I know most people have played Scholar, and I love it in Scholar. The first section is fine enough, just a few archdrakes to contend with as you go through the fairly linear area, as well as maybe a couple of the crawling guys, but the second area is where it really comes into its own, I think. You need to carefully make your way through the area while taking out any of the priestesses that outgrow onto you. The thing is, they're spaced out in such a way that you'll only ever have 2 attacking you at most, unless you skip one, and most of the time you'll have a pillar or a piece of environment to block one of their projectiles. Every time you need to fight a different enemy than the priestesses, there are other pieces of the environment or whatever that you can use to mitigate them entirely. The level is so carefully laid out to give you so many ways to tackle each individual encounter, even entirely melee. A bow even trivializes this area. Sunlight Blade is probably the hardest thing to get in the level, but a bit of care to not go flying off the small ledge you have to work with and using pillars to deal with the priestesses makes it not too bad. I actually ended up dying because of the 3 archdrakes before the next fog wall because I didn't realize I didn't fully kill one of them, which is honestly a pretty funny way to die. From the bonfire, it's very easy to just hug the left wall and make it to the Demon of Song without fighting a single enemy. It's pretty weak to dark, so his wet status making him resistant to fire doesn't really matter. I think he's weak to lightning, but I forgot to attune Sunlight Blade before fighting him. A quick chat with Aldia later, and I realized that I forgot a pretty important boss from earlier in the game. The run goes down pretty quick though, so it's not much of an issue. I now have enough souls to get 54 faith for a maxed out Sunlight Blade duration and a good chunk of vigor and even a bit more attunement. The Crypt is a pretty easy level when you know where you're going, though the Great Shield Door guys can be kind of annoying when they just don't move for a while. A couple quick sprints past a few enemies, being careful to go fast enough that the pyromancers don't start spawning, and going particularly quick after dropping down here lets me get through the level very quickly. I had to apply Sunlight Blade immediately after entering Velstadt's arena, so I couldn't easily cast Whisper, but a bit of care lets me get it off regardless. My damage isn't incredible here, but it's certainly not bad. This wasn't my cleanest Velstadt fight by any means, but it was easy enough that it didn't matter. I accidentally used his soul despite wanting Sacred Oath, so I fought him again with an ascetic, but then I remembered that Sacred Oath actually takes 4 attunement slots, so I didn't end up using it at all. I won't complain about a few extra souls though. With that, I'm gonna bite the bullet and actually take on the Pilgrims of the Dark Covenant. That went well. I'm starting with the castle one because it's my least favorite, despite being the shortest from the bonfire to the end. Havel is really annoying, but a bit of care and kiting takes care of him despite the narrow pathway. Ricard 2.0 isn't that bad either due to his low health, as much as I'd prefer to just not have to fight him. This is one of the things I wanted the flame butterflies for, to light the braziers, and the final enemy in this area isn't really worth mentioning. The next chasm I took on was the one in the gulch. I find the turtle guys much easier than Havel, and they can easily be comboed by Longsword R2s. The pyromancer with him is a little annoying, but not too bad at all. The next turtle can be kited away from its respective pyromancer, meaning they're even easier than the last 2. The final of the 3 chasms is in the Shaded Woods, and is, in my opinion, the easiest. The first 3 enemies are usually pretty easy to kite, and they're both pretty easy to either knock down into a hole or just fight normally one-on-one. The way the holes are placed and the fact that the elevator starts in the lowered position fully convinced me that the developers are just trying to troll you with this chasm, but as long as you're careful, the final enemy doesn't put up much of a fight. I'm usually pretty bad at the Dark Lurker fight, but it is weak to lightning and not particularly resistant to fire. Being careful to dodge its projectiles gave me plenty of attack opportunities, and a lucky attack before splitting let me deal a bunch of damage while she was splitting, leading the second phase to only last a few seconds. That was one of the easiest Dark Lurker fights I've ever had. That gets me one of my favorite Dark Souls 2 fashion sets, the Xanthus set. Unfortunately, the crown doesn't really do it for me, and I have another crown I'd rather wear, but the chest and leg pieces will do nicely for now, paired with the engraved gauntlets. Now that I have my build put together and have some fashion, it's time for a bit of cleanup. First up is the Gargoyles, who are probably my least favorite base game Dark Souls 2 boss. I don't think it's a bad idea. A subversion of the Gargoyle fight where you have to fight 6 instead of 2 is really cool, but they spawn far too quickly, where you'll be fighting at least 3 at once if you can't rush them down fairly quickly, and even one-on-one, they're not the most fun to fight. Luckily, Sunlight Blade makes that a non-issue, but it's worth airing my grievances. Next up on the chopping block is the Executioner's Chariot, who is much quicker if you just have a little ADP and can roll through the sides instead of hiding in the nooks. I always make sure to take out the last Necromancer so I don't have to deal with too many skeletons, and my high level makes the actual fight pretty quick despite my extremely sloppy play. Sometimes I can fight pretty much any boss hitless, other times I get hit more by the chariot than most other base game bosses. The Royal Red Authority is up next. I did get toxicked almost immediately, but over 30 vigor is enough to survive that as long as I make sure to be careful to heal. Another slobby boss fight later, despite beating this boss hitless several times in the past, and we can deal with the other rat fight. The Royal Rat Vanguard is a cool idea for a boss, but coming here this late makes calling it a boss feel like a bad practical joke, so we can move on. With the King's Ring, we can get into Aldia's Keep, not get invaded by Aslatiel because... Actually, I'm not really sure why. I thought it was because I didn't talk to Lucatiel, but I haven't talked to Lucatiel in future runs, and he just didn't spawn, so I have no idea. Anyway, we can carefully make our way past the ogres to the Guardian Dragon. Its fire resistance is once again kind of a non-issue with Sunlight Blade and Whisper of Despair. I wonder if I could somehow make it so that I have a melee weapon that deals literally no damage and I have to get all my damage from weapon buffs. That's an idea for a future run, I suppose. Anyway, a few stomps later and the Guardian Dragon stomps right into its grave. The Dragonary is fast enough, even though I completely forgot how to make the jump from the other side of the bridge and how to go the long way. Sharon is always annoying, but having good damage definitely makes her less bad. I actually didn't know that you could skip this entire level by just taking a zipline, so I went through it the harder optional way. I have learned quite a bit about this game since I wrote this. Mini Aldia says hi before one of my favorite concepts for a level in the game. We have to take out all the big guys in our way so the little guys don't bother us. That's made a little bit more annoying when the second big guy has the fastest attacks, does the most damage, and has the most health, but sacrificing one of my casts of Whisper of Despair is more than worth it. He's genuinely harder than the actual boss here. The Ancient Dragon is funny though, at least, as long as you don't die to it repositioning after breathing fire. You can just stand between its toes and keep attacking. It should only do the foot stomp and the fire breath under itself, both of which are very easy to dodge. If it does fly up at any point, just run towards its tail and it won't hit you with the fire. The fight took a while, but it wasn't a hard one at least. The Giant's memories kind of feel like they're designed to be sprinted through. Even the very obvious mini-boss and the memory of Amara can be slipped past. The memory of Oro doesn't have much worth mentioning other than the fact that it looked like the giant got launched at me. Our final memory, the memory of Jay, contains our next boss, the Giant Lord. We did already beat this guy in the future, and the exact same strategy of standing between its legs and occasionally dodging works perfectly fine. Admittedly, it might actually be easier to stand up on the ledge to the left, but this gives us way more attack opportunities and makes the fight much faster. He's also pretty weak to dark, so that helps quite a bit. You can't exactly sprint past that boss, but it's close enough. His attacks are similar to the last giant for the most part, lots of walking back and forth between the legs, and the occasional roll to dodge the janky hitbox and the swords. The giant's kinship is what actually lets us get an ending, so I headed straight to the Throne Watcher and Defender. I did completely forget Ventric until the end of the DLCs, so no Aldia this time, but honestly I can't imagine the fight would have been that interesting. I hit the Defender with Whisper of Despair on my way into the arena, which lets me take out most of its health in only a few hits, making him drop his shield and go on the offensive, making it much easier to finish off his health bar. As long as you're careful about your attack opportunities and notice the difference in their movement, taking them out safely isn't that difficult. Or you can just DPS one of them down, that works too. I missed the Watcher with Whisperer, and she is quite a bit more mobile, but with the damage this thing puts out and having the speed of a straight sword, that honestly wasn't much of an issue. I did have to be a little careful to not get too greedy, but everything ended up working out fine. Nashandra might be the easiest final boss From has ever made, too. She can be a little threatening if you're not paying attention to how quickly the curse orbs drain your health and lower your max, but as long as you're careful to manage your stamina properly, she doesn't really pose much of a threat. Hell, I didn't even manage my stamina well, and I was still able to beat her fairly quickly. Well, since that's done and I forgot Vendrick, it's time for the DLC. I want to start with Allium Lois, partially because fire will probably be pretty useful here, and partially because we can find the fire clutch ring here. It's actually fairly easy to get through the first chunk of Allium Lois, which is, in my opinion, the second hardest part of the level. As long as you kill every enemy as it approaches, you'll never get overwhelmed or surrounded. The area around the fountain is where it starts to get properly difficult, but as long as you hug the left wall, you only have to fight 2 enemies at once. A third once we come back through once the blizzard is dissipated. Immediately running into this little cubby will leave us with 2 more, then running up the stairs will give us 2 more. 1 as long as you can take out the first somewhat quickly. Inside the building is where it gets a little bit more difficult, with 4 whole enemies, one of which is a dog. Well, after I go grab the dark clutch ring first. The dog is the easiest to take out, and the other 3 can easily be funneled down the stairway at the entrance to the building to fight them a little bit more one-on-one. From there, it's an easy sprint past a couple enemies to the bonfire, though we'll have to come back later for the key to the frigid outskirts. The rest of the level is a lot easier to sprint through since none of the enemies will come onto the bridge with this rampart golem, so it's the only thing guarding the lever. I rarely fight any enemies past this specific golem since no others block any pathways, and we can reach the Eye of the Priestess and go take on Ava. Ava is actually one of my favorite bosses in the game. She's weak to dark, so dark weapon will be useful, and Whisper of Despair when she jumps down, assuming it doesn't miss completely. Most of her attacks are most easily dodged by either rolling away, kind of like Calamite, or directly under her if you have decent agility, kind of like Sif. Actually, she's a lot faster than both of them and has a bit more of a rhythm to her fight. It's almost like Menace in that way, where she attacks you and you counter over and over, with some switch-ups like her AoE or homing soulmass-like attack, and with opportunities to throw in some switch-ups of your own, like an extra attack here or there, or even iframing through the Wrath of the Gods-esque attack, which I failed to do completely in this fight. Maybe she's more similar to the Sanctuary Guardian, actually? I don't know, I'm having a hard time not comparing her to bosses I like similarly in Dark Souls 1, but she kinda just takes from a bunch of bosses that I do really love. Either way, now that Ava is down, the blizzard is gone, and we can go wake up the Loist Knights to help us with the Ivory King. I'm gonna do the one from the 3rd bonfire first, since that's where the fire clutch ring is. On my way, we get invaded by Orhim, who might be the most annoying NPC invasion in this game. If you don't know, he uses Chameleon to hide as a barrel in this corridor and doesn't move until you try to open the chest or attack him. Him being here causes 2 fog walls to appear right after the night, trapping you in, but he doesn't chase you, so if you don't attack him, you'll just be sitting here until the time limit expires. You can go up this staircase near him to funnel him and the other enemies through and deal with him a bit easier, but it's definitely not 100%, especially with how many of the enemies can follow you. I'm gonna grab the Garrison Ward key next, since it's kinda out of the way. We've already gone this way earlier, and with a flame butterfly to light the sconces, we can run into the cave, grab the key at the back, and run out fairly painlessly, despite the enemies all over the place. The nearby night location is probably the hardest part of the DLC, since it's crawling with hedgehogs, the only enemy in the game that deals contact damage, an NPC invasion, a troll NPC that's not even an invader, and an entire covetous demon. The easiest way to handle this area is to comb the lower area and clear out all the hedgehogs before climbing up the ladder and dealing with the mages and Nikolai, the NPC invader. You can also just sprint up to the lever and suicide run to the shortcut, but I like not dying in Dark Souls 2. The Lancer is tanky, but no harder than any other NPC. Annoying when he runs though. The covetous demon can't follow you, but he's not exactly hard to deal with either way. The last little area with the hedgehogs and golems is best to run past, and the hill with all the golems and hedgehogs can be dealt with either way, though usually I prefer to stay safe and go slow. The last night is the easiest to get by far, with just some ladders to slide down and an invader who does very little damage and has very little health. Before we fight the Ivory King though, I want to first go fight the optional boss of the DLC, Ludden Zalin. The frigid outskirts are annoying at worst. If you know where you're going, which ideally you should when you're running back to the boss, you'll have to fight 2 or 3 reindeer at most, since they don't spawn as long as you hide in the buildings during the blizzard. And Flame Weapon on the Fire Longsword takes them out fairly quickly. Hey, look at that, a use for Flame Weapon. Mostly so I don't have to waste Dark Weapon, but still. If you don't quite make it inside on time, you can always even lure the reindeer into the building so you can be a bit safer about it. They aren't a fun enemy to deal with, they do a lot of damage and have some funky and very annoying attacks, and this is my second least favorite level in the game, but I honestly like Ludden Zalin enough that I don't really care all that much. A 2 or 3 minute run and a few annoying enemies aren't enough to dissuade me. Ludden Zalin are actually probably my favorite boss in all of Dark Souls 2. The stakes are pretty high after going through the frigid outskirts, so you're probably already on edge going into the fight. Lud has the same moveset and less health than Ava though, so you start to relax until Zalin jumps down into the fray. From there, it's a frantic attempt to take out Lud as quickly as possible and to calmly fighting again when it's one-on-one. Then Zalin starts buffing out of nowhere, which can really throw you off if you're not ready to rush him down. Otherwise, you have a Velstadt scenario where the fight can end up lasting far longer than you expected it to, and you lose the War of Attrition, or recalibrate and stick it out. Zalin only heals for a short time, so you don't even need to outdamage the heal to kill him. I know I've been talking a lot about Ilium Lois, but it's become my favorite part of Dark Souls 2 over time, and I wanted to gush about it with this first chance that I get for that. Unfortunately, that gushing ends with what is usually one of the most liked parts of the DLC by most people. In order to actually fight the Ivory King, we need to take out about a dozen of his charred knights. The 4 other knights helping us is a nice boon, but it really does not offset the absurd amount of enemies we need to kill, especially when the charred knights ignore the other knights completely and sprint straight for you, even when they're hit by the other knights. Honestly, even with our knights dealing so little damage and not having a ton of health, them just actually drawing aggro would make this so much less annoying. It's not strictly unfun, the vibes are great, but when you fought the boss well over a dozen times, that doesn't really help me enjoy killing a dozen unnecessarily tanky enemies anymore. Dark Weapon does help with their fire resistance enough that I'm not dealing no damage, but it definitely still drags. Once all the charred knights are gone though, the boss is aggressively fine. Whisper of Despair and Sunlight Blade gives me reasonable damage, to the point where I was able to kill him before his buff wore off, which tends to be the metric I go by to determine if the fight is going on too long. He doesn't use much of his full moveset, it's mostly just the dashes and stabs, occasionally using his sweeps and combos, so learning to dodge him isn't exactly a feat. Shulva is probably the shortest DLC when you know where you're going. Sprinting into the temple isn't particularly difficult, and destroying the armor sets in the room with the 2 pits is actually a pretty fun combat exercise with how much you need to kite to do this safely. This isn't necessary to get the Dragonstone, but it certainly makes it much easier. From there, we can run down to where Jester Thomas invades. There's actually a silly quirk to his AI where he won't attack until he uses a gesture, so if you attack him when he spawns, he'll keep trying to roll away, which is really easy to just combo him out of, making him simply not a threat. The Imperfect are scary, but not impossible to run past, with a bonfire for safety, and we can place the Dragonstone, make sure the cat ring is equipped, and make our way down to the Sanctum. There's a bonfire behind an illusory wall here, on the floor below this Drakeblood Knight, but I actually ended up missing it and sprinting straight down to Alana. Alana is actually one of my favorite bosses in the game, with how simple but varied her moveset is to facilitate having Velstadt, and they're fun to dodge together since Velstadt isn't the hardest to just run away from. I don't think she's particularly resistant to fire, and with Sunlight Blade on top of that, we do a good chunk of damage, so this should be pretty easy. Well, maybe I should have gotten that bonfire. While I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and grab the Lightning Clutch Ring for a bit more damage and run up to the bonfire for the optional boss in this DLC. Baldur's Gate 5 didn't put up much of a fight for whatever reason. Now we can go back and try Alana one more time. The Lightning Clutch Ring doesn't help a ton, but it definitely helps, and I'm sure it'll help even more against Sin since he's relatively weak to lightning. With a bunch of unchecked greed, any fight is sure to end well, evidenced by my brazen lack of care ending in my victory. I was a little worried about Sin going into this run, since he has pretty high fire resistance, but the damage, while not overwhelmingly high, isn't that bad. He does tend to try and fly around a lot in every fight, sometimes more than others, and he actually didn't try to fly around a ton this time. I mean, he definitely flew around quite a bit, but this was a particularly lucky Sin fight, and one of my fastest ever, to the point where I was able to beat him before Sunlight Blade even wore off, and before my weapon broke. A little bit more unchecked greed near the end went a long way to that end, of course, but I'm really surprised at just how well this went. Again, I'm sure Sunlight Blade carried quite a bit on top of Lightning Clutch Ring, but he just didn't run away that much. Before fighting the Grave Robbers, I went ahead into Broom Tower to get the crown that prevents hollowing. I used the coolest path to get to the DLC key, as one should, and headed in. Broom Tower is by far the hardest DLC for me, and that's not helped by my weapon dealing fire damage. Admittedly, not trying to run past everything does help lower the difficulty a lot, but with how much health things have with the Nadalia idle buff and not wanting to waste the smelter wedges you get at the beginning, it's still pretty rough sometimes. There are also a lot of enemies, but for the most part you can kite enemies in ways that you won't have to fight too many at one time. The next room with the lever is significantly harder, primarily because of the big lava spewer, but it's honestly not too difficult to use the barrel carriers. Annoying, sure, but not difficult. A couple fire arrows also go a long way to egg them on. A bit of care to make sure I'm not attacked at the lever, and I can keep making my way down just fine. Getting the Scorching Scepter is probably the most annoying part of the DLC, mostly because of all the explodey guys that have a ton more health than they should and just generally aren't worth killing. That, and falling off the edge while fighting an NPC, of course. Taking a bit of care makes it easy enough to get the scepter, and I'm honestly not sure why I didn't just use the feather at this point. Either way, it's not too difficult to get back to the foyer bonfire, and it's just a couple more elevators and one more combat challenge that's pretty easy if you take it one floor at a time to get to the Fume Knight. Weirdly, Fume is one of the few bosses I don't tend to struggle with in this game, and I never really have. It's not an easy boss per se, but it's not particularly difficult. There's just nothing special about him, and being a little patient will see him fall in no time. Admittedly, I'm not good at the fight. This is just so far into the game that you have so many tools to just nullify the difficulty, and he's not fast enough, like Alan, and he doesn't hit hard enough, like the Blue Smelter Demon, to really pose a huge challenge. I did go down to a poorly timed dodge, but with a little bit more patience, especially with his higher fire defense, he goes down in only one more attempt. I even had the ability to rebuff and cast another Whisper in the middle of the fight. With that crown, I finally realized I never fought Vendrick. He's not a hard boss, despite dealing as much damage as he does, but he is really tanky, even with all 5 Giant Souls. I think he has maybe 5 attacks. Stupid deaths like this are the reason I want the Imbued Crown. With him dead, we can head back to the Shrine of Amana and grab his crown from this door, then head back to his memory for him to imbue all 4 crowns. Of the 4, I like the color on the crown of the Sunken King most, but I don't love the shape, so I'll be sticking to the King's crown for aesthetic purposes. The Blue Smelter run is infamously annoying, and honestly, I don't know how much I agree. Don't get me wrong, it's not easy, but as long as you pay attention, it's pretty easy to get through the main way without getting hit. The other way is much faster, but also much harder and much less consistent in single player in my experience. The first optional path is easier than the second though, so I tend to do the first half of the optional path, then switch to the main path. Unfortunately, it's not safe to buff outside the fog wall, but it's not too hard to do while in the arena itself. It happens to be fairly weak to dark as well, so our damage is more than manageable. Just watch out for the explosion and the transition to the second phase, since the red demon doesn't do that. The timing and extra chip damage can be rough to deal with, especially if you're relatively experienced with the red version, but a bit of patience makes it none too difficult to adapt. The health bar is a bit chunky, and he hits hard, but overall he's really not significantly harder than the normal demon as long as you're being a little careful. Getting to Alan's memory isn't too much of a hassle, with only the Prowlers on the way, and they're a fun little mini-boss. The memory itself, though, I find to be the most annoying run back in the game by quite a bit. It's not particularly long, but there are so many enemies, and the salamanders especially make the run infuriating. It's not too hard, admittedly, I just really don't like doing it. But hey, as long as I beat Alarm first try, that won't matter, right? That wouldn't be too bad if the grab attack didn't have one of the most annoying delays in the game. I know it's like that specifically to break up the rhythm of the fight, and I do appreciate it for that, but god, it's annoying to get hit by, especially with the tinnitus it gives you for however long the buff lasts. I did eventually learn to dodge it consistently with even less ADP, but this was rough to get by in this run, especially when it was pretty much the only attack I got hit by in this fight, and I got hit every single time he used it. Otherwise, the dash is pretty easy to dodge by just rolling to the right every time. His normal combos are pretty easy to time. His jump is funky, but not particularly difficult to dodge. And his other pokes and such are rare enough that even if they were particularly hard to dodge, they wouldn't be much of an issue. He never ended up using his ranged magic in any of my 3 fights with him either, luckily. Alan is a really simple fight, but he's just fast enough to throw you off the rhythm you've been in the whole game, and that, on top of the weird timing of a couple of his attacks, can make him a formidable challenge if you haven't already beaten the game a few dozen times. The Grave Robbers are by far my least favorite boss in this game. There's not really a boss I dread fighting, but this is the only one I just cannot enjoy in most runs. It's not, like, bad, but I wouldn't complain about accidentally forgetting it in future runs. Unfortunately though, I did remember to fight them in this one. I tend to take out the Grave Robber and Varg before Sarah, but with how little health she has and her range, it's probably just a better idea to take out Sarah first. I do think it's really cool how the boss expects you to use basically the entire arena to your advantage to split them up and to give yourself a breather when you need it. That's probably the only exclusively positive thing I can say about this boss though. It's kinda tedious when you're just constantly kiting the enemies, and since they're NPCs, it'd be pretty boring if you didn't need to, like when there's only one of them left. Well, with them down, that's every boss except Alia. I was honestly really surprised with how well the Fire Longsword performed against especially some of the DLC bosses like Sin or the Fume Knight. I wasn't expecting much lower damage, but with how buffs and damage types work in this game, it was actually really good all the way through, and I really enjoyed that run despite its simplicity. I have no idea why, but this video was really hard for me to edit, so I'm sorry that this took so long. I really did try to get it out sooner, but this took so long that I actually need to redo the member read in post. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I love you all, and I would especially like to thank Zvother, Sea Dark, Cosmo Kyle, Rikishi, Dewey Adams, Lucky Dragon, Ornstein with a Glock, Your Mom Gayest. Actually, I think I'm significantly gayer than my mom is. VR Snowstar, Dodgy Haji, The Smo, Manu Bunny, Astro Lily, The Art Devil, Validit, Nick Possum, Krista, Hellel Nocturne, Ryasune21, Raccoona, White Flame, Manarok, and Ryan Rickard. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. I don't know how to end this.